Man, can you believe it? It's Francis Ngannou and Anthony Joshua fight week, and obviously I'm extremely excited for it, as I'm sure many of the boxing and MMA fans out there, because obviously it is one of those particular events that brings these two sports together. You have Francis Ngannou, the linear heavyweight champion of the UFC, arguably the one that should be holding Jon Jones's title in the current moment of time. Will we ever see that Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou fight? Only time will tell. But we do know what we will see is Anthony Joshua taking on Francis Ngannou in what he perceives to be as a freak show fight. And also probably one of the hardest fights of his career, and he doesn't even know it yet. So before we go into that, I want to talk about Amanda Serrano and the fact that she had her fight canceled just right after Jake Paul had a first-round knockout against Ryan Borland. Now, here's some interesting aspects that I think I want to share with the Amanda Serrano story before we go into the Francis Ngannou and the Anthony Joshua fight, and also some of the reviews that we could do for UFC Vegas 87, headlined by Gaziev versus Rosenstruck. Also featured in that card, you had Muhammad Makayev, you had Omar Nurmagomedov, and among other fighters in that card, Ayman Zahabi. The list could go on. I'm not going to go into the whole entire card. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But for sure, I'm going to go into Amanda Serrano, Francis Ngannou, and on top of that, UFC Vegas 87. And on top of that, also a bit of some preview for UFC 299 Miami, which, by the way, is headlined by Sean O'Malley, who is getting trolled by the likes of Ryan Garcia in the current moment of time, saying that he wants to step in the cage against him. Now, how much of a reality is that, and how much of just online banter and just trash talking are we dealing with here? But nonetheless, let's talk about Amanda Serrano and her having her fight canceled in Puerto Rico. Now, for those of you that have never fought before or have never competed, you have to do a doctor's checkup. You have to make sure that everything is intact. You got to make sure that your eyes are working. And by the way, credit to Michael Bisping, because he's fought his whole entire career with one eye and has managed to somehow bypass state commissions and doctors and things of that nature just so he can make a living, because obviously he had torn out his eye when he caught that spinning heel kick from none other than Vitor Belfort, which altered his entire career as a result. And of course, that in and of itself he blames for the use of steroids and things of that nature. But nonetheless, with Amanda Serrano, the doctor in Puerto Rico said that she was not clear to fight because she had some eye issues. And Jake Paul even mentions during the announcement post co-main event, which he was, and Amanda Serrano was the main event of that entire card, he mentions and says, hey, you know what? It's not worth losing an eye, over a fight. And by the way, Jake Paul is 100% correct about that. So also credit to Jake Paul for giving his athlete a sense of humanity and not just a sense of business venture of saying, hey, you know what? I want you to go out there because we got a lot of money on the line. In fact, he even went as far as to say, you know what? I'm going to give everybody in the crowd a refund. And rightfully so, because guess what? This particular event was just a filler for Jake Paul and maybe even Amanda Serrano. And that shows you it was probably a filler because I don't know much about her opponent. And if you do, write on a comment section below and tell me if that opponent of hers was any danger at all. I highly doubt it. But nonetheless, like and subscribe anyway as I continue on with Francis Ngannou and Anthony Joshua in the preview for this upcoming matchup. So I got to tell you guys, this matchup is extremely dangerous for Anthony Joshua. And a lot of people don't like to see it that way. The reason being is because you got to understand, the way that I see boxing and its culture, they're very much a gatekeeping culture. And let me explain what that means. Last night, I was watching the George Foreman Netflix show, right? And let me explain why this is important. So George Foreman, as you know, grew up in Texas, very poor, didn't have a lot of money, didn't have a lot of opportunity, and all of a sudden he goes into the Job Corps meets a boxing trainer and says, hey, you know what? I think you could be really good at this. Teaches him how to box. First off, in the beginning of the boxing stint of this movie, George Foreman was getting his butt whooped by somebody that was a little bit more experienced. And then afterwards, his trainer started training him, and next thing you know, he knew how to cut off the ring. He knew how to use his jab. He knew how to use his body hooks correctly and use his power to his advantage. And so he became a boxer within a short period of time. He told his coach, hey, you know what? I want to run for the Olympics and get the gold straight away. Just within 1 year. His coach said, and this is the point that I'm trying to make, boxing has a gatekeeping culture where they don't believe that a super freak athlete like George Foreman, like Anthony Joshua, like Francis Ngannou can just get in there at the highest levels, whether it's amateur or pro, and completely dominate, especially if you have the right attributes to do so. So here comes George Foreman, 1 year later of training boxing, and then he knocks out a Russian in Mexico to win the gold for the United States. And guess what? He proved this trainer wrong. And by the way, this is a common thing that happens in boxing. They constantly say, you know what, you can't do this because you don't have the right amount of experience. When I was at a boxing gym, guys, I gotta tell you, I've had a few boxing trainers, and I'm not gonna mention which boxing gyms they are, because I'm not here to trash anybody, but I'm just simply here to explain the type of culture that you're dealing with. They told me, you cannot go out there and switch stances. And I said, why? They said the reason why you can't go out there and switch stances is because you're a beginner. Well, all right, I may be a beginner in boxing, but guess what? I'm not a beginner in terms of combat sports. I grew up doing taekwondo. I grew up doing wrestling. I grew up doing kickboxing. And then obviously in my adulthood, I started competing in Muay Thai and got into MMA, and that's about it. Right? So I'm really not an experienced combat athlete, and especially not in switching stances. Because when you're in Taekwondo, they do nothing but constantly emphasize how to switch stances, how to kick on both sides, how to punch on both sides of the stances. Also in wrestling, did you know that in wrestling, in order for you to shoot in a single leg or a double leg takedown, you have to do the opposite of what you do in your conventional stances that you do in, let's say, striking sports. So in other words, if you are a southpaw, then you have to shoot in at your orthodox position. If you are orthodox, then you have to shoot in at a southpaw position. So what sport better than wrestling and taekwondo to teach you stance switching? And then here comes a boxing trainer who may not understand the other sports and the other combat compository sports that I may understand, and somehow says that I can't go out and perform stance switches because I'm too inexperienced. But again, it's just a small example of how boxing can be a very gatekeeping sport. So here comes Francis Ngannou. They see a guy like him prior to the Tyson Fury fight. Everybody was saying the same thing. They were saying, hey, you know what? This guy right here is going to get smoked by Tyson Fury. And did that happen? Well, guess what? It was a very controversial decision, and by the looks of things, it looks like Francis Ngannou can beat a lot of top heavyweights in the heavyweight boxing scene just based on his performance alone with Tyson Fury. Now, you can argue, and to play advocate, say something to the effect that, hey, you know what? Tyson Fury was not on his game. He was not ready. He was not this and he was not that. But then there are some that say, you know what? We've seen Tyson Fury in his training camp leading up to Francis Ngannou, and he trained hard just like he would for any other fight, just like he would for the Klitschko fight, just like he did against any other top heavyweight that he's faced, such as Deontay Wilder and among other names. So that's an argument in and of itself. However, the performance and the apparent of what we see and why we can judge only by the apparent shows that Francis Ngannou is a top-notch level boxer and could potentially become a very dangerous outing for Anthony Joshua as a result. Why? Let me explain a couple of things. For one, Anthony Joshua has a questionable chin. Okay, he's been knocked down a few times. He's been knocked in terms of a TKO by Andy Ruiz. But at the same time, we also don't take into consideration the improvements that he's made against Usyk. And now, it was a loss, and Usyk is arguably the number one heavyweight in the world next to Tyson Fury, probably even unarguably now because of his performance against Tyson Fury's performance with Francis Ngannou. But then you could say that about Alexander Usyk as well with his performance against Daniel Dubois. And then Daniel Dubois just had that big win against Jarrell Miller. Anyway, man, the heavyweight division is so exciting just based on that particular competitive architecture alone. And every match that I had just mentioned, the ones that have happened and the ones that haven't happened, this makes that heavyweight division very interesting. And in particular, this matchup with Anthony Joshua. Because once again, you cannot judge the fact that he lost to Alexander Usyk twice and say there were no sudden improvements in Anthony Joshua. You could be very wrong for making that statement. Very wrong. Because, like I said, Usyk, one of the best in the world. Joshua, right up there, but wasn't too far from that. So how does that translate into going into a fight against, well, Francis Ngannou? All right, let's take a look at some common opponents. Obviously, they don't have common opponents in terms of Tyson Fury because they never fought each other. But we can take a look at Otto Wallin. Otto Wallin almost slept Tyson Fury, almost stopped him by a doctor stoppage based on the fact that he was just busted up and was not able to continue, but then the doctor allowed him to go on and then struggled, yet still won against Otto Wallin. Now, fast forward to Otto Wallin fighting Anthony Joshua. How did that play out? Anthony Joshua finished him, and it showed that maybe he's just a little bit better than Tyson Fury, or you never know. Or maybe it's just one of these situations where whatever fight night presents itself on a certain date, guys are going to perform differently on these particularly various different nights. In other words, no fight day and no particular fight is the same over the other. And that's something we have to understand as boxing fans, especially boxing fans that have a very skeptical mindset of how they go about with, let's say, judging people and taking a look at how they can predict these fights. So here's another thing I wanted to talk about with you guys is UFC 87. Now, obviously, I was a bit disappointed and devastated for Gaziev's loss. Okay, but at the same time, I gotta tell you, man, a fight is a fight. It happens. These things go down the way that they do in a very unpredictable manner, and that's MMA in a nutshell. Muhammad Mokaev did a very good job. He was challenged along the way, but at the same time, he did the damn thing, and sometimes in MMA, you got to do what you got to do. Omar Nurmagomedov also was, very much challenged in this particular fight, in his fight against Omar Khan. Omar Khan did a great job rocking him a few times, but again, a lot of people are going to look at that and say, there's a chink in armor for Omar Nurmagomedov. What a lot of people don't understand is that Omar Nurmagomedov is going to take that particular setting that he just had with his fight with Omar Khan, and he's going to make a lot of adjustments. And as a result, you got to understand that those adjustments, it's going to make him a different fighter the next time he comes around. So you may not see the same thing again. And you also got to take into consideration maybe Omar Khan is a very, very tough outing, right? It was his UFC debut. And by the way, Omar Nurmagomedov is having a hard time getting fights because just like his cousins and his brothers, Islam and Khabib and even Khamzat, they're having a hard time getting matched up. So now he had to face a guy that was very tough, but nobody knows about it because it was his UFC debut. But nonetheless, great win for him. Great win for Ayman Zahabi. And great job to Rosenstruck for being able to come out with the win, right? I didn't expect him to win. I would have thought that Gaziev's boxing was going to somehow neutralize Rosenstruck. But Rosenstruck did a great job being able to use the boxing in terms of trying to neutralize Gaziev, and as a result, used his experience within the 5-round range to defeat Gaziev. And I'm sure Gaziev will learn from this. He will come back. Omar Nurmagomedov will learn from some of the mistakes that he's made in this fight, even though he won. And there have been massive improvements for Ayman Zahabi, and great job on Makayev, who I believe is now earning a title shot as a result of his performance. But either way, quite an exciting week of fights, because we got Francis Ngannou and Anthony Joshua. But I'm going to go more into that as this week goes on. I hope you guys enjoyed the fight weeks that have been happening. Oh, and by the way, how about Sean O'Malley? I'm going to do a little bit of preview on Sean O'Malley right now, and Marlon Vera, and then I'm going to do the rest of the card sometime this week as well. So here it goes, right, with Marlon Vera and Sean O'Malley. So obviously the first time around, Sean O'Malley caught a leg kick which debilitated a certain side of his leg, and he got finished as a result, getting ground and pounded by Marlon Vera. Now, this is a completely different fight because we've seen the improvements that Sean O'Malley has made. He does a lot of different things in terms of, let's say, following a certain sleeping pattern, being on top of his nutrition. And then on top of that, he has a coach, Tim Welsh, who he's trusted for a long time. By the way, a guy who I call the Canelo Jiu-Jitsu Canelo, as I call him, because he looks like Canelo, but he's a jiu-jitsu practitioner and an MMA coach. But nonetheless, a guy that Sean O'Malley trusts very well. Not to say that Marlon Vera doesn't have that camp that intact in that kind of way, but I think this is a difference of the improvement that Sean O'Malley is going to make in this particular fight. Now, is he going to be able to finish Marlon Vera? I think it's going to be highly implausible for him to do so, and I'm going to tell you why. I think that Marlon Vera is coming into the most important fight of his life, and as a result, he's going to train extremely hard to a certain point to where he's going to leave no stone unturned. In other words, his defense is going to be on point, his wrestling is going to be on point, and I think that every aspect of his game is going to be ready, and he's going to be heavily prepared. Also, he's going to try to go for the leg kicks as well, which worked out for him originally. But I think that this is why this fight is going to go to a decision, because Sean O'Malley is going to be very careful in how he deals with somebody like that, and the first time around in which they had that particular fight. So in other words, it's going to be a very technical affair, but I think it's going to go towards the side of Sean O'Malley as a result. So that is all I have. Let's recap of all the things that I talked about. Anthony Joshua and Francis Ngannou fight week, giving you guys an early look at what's going to happen in this particular fight. Two guys that are very strong and two guys that can hit, but one guy is more favored of the other, which is Francis Ngannou, surprisingly, just based on his last performance and the fact that he is the hardest hitting man in human history of the sports almanac statistics. Okay, so those are very serious claims to make, and rightfully so. So now as a result, you have a great matchup. In fact, I'm going to say this is a 50-50 matchup. Amanda Serrano, she made the right choice. A lot of people booed in the crowd, but I get it and I understand. But great job on Jake Paul for giving everybody a refund. UFC 87, Vegas 87 was a fun fight night card. Was very disappointing, obviously, for Gaziev, because we wanted to see him as the next Muslim heavyweight to dominate in that particular scene, or the next Muslim fighter to be up there, especially in a heavyweight division where the Dagestanis are not really dominating in that particular sense. But he will bounce back, learn from this, and I'm sure he's going to come back with new wrinkles in his game. And obviously, the rest of the people in the card that I have mentioned didn't really go over the entire card, but nonetheless went over some of the important matchups and the important fights. And I also did a preview just now of UFC 299, of which I will do a full card breakdown sometime this week, inshallah. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you guys like this particular content, and I will see you guys soon, inshallah.